And welcome back inside Brunch from 107.7. It's currently make that 18 minutes away from the top of the hour.
And our second guest this morning is, well, we've been saying it's a mayor of Port of Spain, Mr. Raymond Timke, and I've just asked him which hat he prefers to wear, whether it's as mayor of Port of Spain or president of the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association, the new Trinidad and Tobago Football Association. And the discussion is football after Jack Warner. So, but first, Mr. Timke, we know that you were in Zurich when all of this unfolded, and I haven't heard you explain like what were you feeling like? What happened? It took you by surprise. What happened? Because Trinidad and Tobago is figuring more than anything else, and you are the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association. So, what unfolded in Zurich? What did you feel? How did it happen to you?
Well, of course, it was a great surprise, simply because we were all focused on the election. In fact, there's the evening before the arrest, we had dinner, we were liming and chatting, and he left to retire.
And that by he you mean
Jeff
Webb,
the president
of CONCACAF, yeah.
And I think it was around 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the morning. I got a call that asked me if I knew what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I said, like what? They said the FBI just stormed the hotel and arrested the president and Jeff Webb and some others.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the word went around the hotel, and everybody was up, and we appeared to the lobby area, and of course there would be comments and expression of disappointment and shock, and that was the kind of mood that prevailed in that environment at that time.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for coming. But it does raise the question. You say the mood was of shock. Was it really shock? I mean, we've been hearing for a long time questions circulating as to the hierarchy of FIFA, the manner in which things are conducted. So was there no discussion anywhere at all that folks are being looked into so that it was not a complete shock? Surprise, yes, but shock, no.
It was a shock from a standpoint of everybody was sort of singularly focused on what was going to happen in 2 days. And that was the election.
The election, yes.
And of course, there would have been the campaigning on the ground, who to vote for and who not to vote for, that sort of thing. So in that context, something like it was not on the radar at all. It was, But having happened, people would then start to say things like, this was long in coming and that sort of thing.
Before you all went, the election was 2 days away. Did CONCACAF have a position, a CONCACAF position on where the votes would go? Because you all are a critical block of votes in the election. Did you all have a position on where the votes would go, or was it each CONCACAF member had their voting?
Well, it was pretty much a decision, a position taken by CONCACAF. Of course, there was an exception. And I tell people, if I had not voted for Prince Ali, he would have received 72 votes.
So you were the exception to CONCACAF?
Yeah. In fact, I worked with him while I was there.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I find also disturbing is that surprising is that after you had this sweep taking place at the hotel and the entire hierarchy was moved out, I could not understand why the president, why the head of FIFA, remained there for the election, and he was elected, and then just 4 or 5 days later on, he said, "Look, I'm calling this quits." I mean, that is perplexing to me. You yourself in your position, not only in Zurich, you were the head of TNT Football Association. I mean, you're watching this. Was that surprising to you that he stayed on, one, and two, even after all he said, he moved after 4 or 5 days later?
Well, what I think I understood was that as all the investigations have revealed so far, there's nothing on him. And if he were to know that, and he believes that, knows and believes that, he wouldn't see any reason to walk, unless he felt, as the head of the organization, he should take responsibility and perhaps, demitted office. But that may have conveyed in some minds that he was guilty. Those who don't understand the collective responsibility kind of situation. Having requested leaving the office so quickly after the election, which is so vigorously fought, the pressures that were made to be on him, any normal human being, I thought, would have. And I think what exacerbated the whole thing is when his right-hand man, his Secretary General, when his name was called among those who would have done things that are questionable. I thought everything was falling around him, and I thought that was the best thing to do.
With the bulk of the money being traced back to his office, yes.
Yes.
So back at home, you were the person who decided that you were going to head the TTFA after Jack Warner. That's an extremely brave move to take up a position, as well as it's been 4 years, and based on what we've been seeing in the media, the to and fro between you and the Ministry of Sports, it's clear that the accounts of you are not getting the accounts right, not just yet. Can you tell us more about this?
First thing, let me make one thing straight. Mr. Warner was not a member of the TTFA executive. He was a special advisor, and on the chart, the organization chart, there's no place for that. So I'm not there to replace him. No, you're not there to replace him.
But we all know in Trinidad he was the man running the show.
Well, it's a situation where a few years ago you recall these Soca Warriors players who were promised the bonus. They had a lien on TTFF and its properties, and they executed that. And among the things they took were all the records they had at the time, the filing cabinets, the computers with the hard drives and everything. And those things contain all the data. So that when they were insisting to me that we should pay them their money, but we had to get the accounts right. And you couldn't get the accounts right if you didn't have the items that would impact.
Tim Key, forgive me for a moment, just that I be really clear here. They had a lien, and that lien allowed them to take the files and the hard drives from the computers?
Everything, including
everything.
The kit for the junior players. And unfortunately, the Minister of Sports now was one of those who told a member of staff, when she said, well, why would you take the children's clothes? He said, well, let them play naked. Well, let them play with their own clothes. So it was that kind of very awkward,
confusing.
Acrimonious, yeah. It was a bitter dispute that spilled out, that you eventually narrated, a very bitter dispute.
Yes, well, I was there at the time. I had left football. I was out.
At the time. So therefore, when you were going to speak with Brent Sancho to get funds, in his capacity as Minister of Sport, therefore, and he is saying that you all don't have the accounts ready as yet. You're saying you have enough to give to him, and he's saying that you don't have it ready. He wants proper accounting before he can disburse further funds. So are you telling him back in those meetings that you have these computers?
I told him that on more than one occasion. Not only that, the reason why I took the KPMG, the auditors, to the meeting with me, with the minister, was for them to tell him what the challenges were, because he wasn't taking my word for it. So when the auditors went, then he claimed he understood the problem.
The mayor of Port of Spain and president of Sharmain said, I think he wanted the president's title here, the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association is our guest here this morning. I am still lost as to how data, the very essence of an organization, can be taken out in a lien. I would think it would be salable assets would be what one gets a judgment against. I'm totally flabbergasted as to that happening. But that as it may, this situation with Trinidad and Tobago football right now, with what is happening with CONCACAF, what's happening with FIFA, tell me, how does this situation impact, and if it does, adversely, on Trinidad and Tobago football?
Well, I do not see any immediate negative impact on us. What has happened is very much at the eagle level in terms of the positioning of the various offices and responsibilities. What we have been doing, however, to insulate ourselves from any such behavior or the alleged behavior is that when I went in office in 2012, November 2012, my first thing was, of course, to do a situational analysis. Let us see where we are and everything. And I was really appalled and extremely surprised the way things were at that time. We were met with a $36 million debt and still counting, and I say still deliberately, 128 creditors. Loss of confidence, because the confidence the football community had been destroyed or diminished or evaporated entirely. The minister had TTFA as persona non grata, which was one of our main sources of revenue. So I had to put my creative mind to work to see how can we get out of this. So the first thing I did, I went to FIFA, of course. I spoke with President Blatter. And to his credit, he was quite sympathetic. I could say even paternalistic in his responses. His tone of voice suggested he was really pained because he spoke of the amount of money that was sent to Trinidad and the losses that we obviously would have suffered because the money never got to football. And
did he attempt to account for that to you? Our aid was lost in the bureaucracy. Did he imply anything, allude to anything, or he was just in pain because I better not comment on this?
No, teams have got match fees from the government. He says he's not paid more than 50%. I said, but that's crazy. That's his position. So, therein lie the facts. What I just shared with you, those are the facts.
So this fracture we're talking about on our way to the Gold Cup, how has that affected the current team?
It would, because there's
I'm asking specifically.
that element of uncertainty. As a matter of fact, while I was in Zurich, the coach wrote a letter to both the General Secretary and me, implying that he has had enough. And he does not know how long again. What he was saying in effect was, I am finished. This is crazy. We cannot be at this stage of a preparation for a major tournament, the major tournament in this part of the world. And we are still going through this.
Are you talking about Stephen Hart?
Stephen Hart.
Do you owe Stephen Hart money still?
No, he was paid.
He was paid off?
Yeah, he's currently, yes. He's up to date, yes.
Yeah. Can I take this to the pathetic state of the women's football team? Why were we unable to capitalize on that massive goodwill that women's football, for the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, filled the national stadium? Then these girls were like, they played on whatever evening. Let's say I'm trying to remember what day of the week it was. They played on Wednesday. Had to leave. They had broken on Thursday. And subsequently, with or without money, I'm wondering, Mr. Timke, and I've always wanted to ask you, they were just left out in the cold and shell-shocked. They needed therapy. For example, Akila Mullen was on the field and she had a panic attack after the game. The girls were crying more than Latapi and York were doing in 1989. Why did it fall to shambles? And I also went to their training at the Hazy Crawford training ground recently. And these are highly talented girls, and there seems to be highly talented and motivated as well. And it seems to be a kind of downer in the camp. What's happening with women's football?
Well, let's go up a little bit. Number one, from my discipline, I understand what a psychologist does. The importance of a psychologist. I am not sure that is as accepted as much as some of us would. So it was coming to the end after several conversations that we were able to secure the the assistant of a psychologist. I don't remember her name, but she is a renowned psychologist, sports psychologist from the United States. She's a Trinidadian, but she's out there lecturing at some university.
At the end, at what point in the competition did you have her when they were in the US?
When they
in the qualifying stages,
right, yeah. Because there was the whole question of where we get the money from to pay them. I think that came from the ministry. And, eventually threw caution to the wind and said, you know what, get on. So she left her state and went across, I think it was Texas, and met the team in camp. And the ladies have all expressed their happiness about her joining because of the work she did. So what you have seen on the field of play had a lot to do with what she would have done with the players. There's something called winding down, especially under those conditions, after they lost.
In Trinidad.
That is when she's really needed to nurture
That's right.
and okay.
Very important component of...
She had to go back to the United States.
Was she here for a game in Trinidad, the final game?
Yes, she was here, yeah.
And how long after did she leave?
I think it may have been the day after.
Oh.
May have been the day after.
The president... I'm sorry, please go ahead.
So there are certain components that have to be seen as imperatives, and that is one. And we'll go on to the other part of the women's football when he's finished.
Yeah.
I was merely about to remind our listeners the voice that they're hearing is that of the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association President and Mayor of Port of Spain, Raymond Tim Key. Just in case they tune into us late and they need to follow this engaging conversation we're having, please continue.
Okay.
How could you have filled the stadium and not have money to pay them? That's their question.
Well, and they're right.
Yeah.
They're right. Football is an emotional sport, and that's why people take lives and commit suicide and all kind of stuff. And those of us who were around in '89 will realize people lying on the street and say, "Let the cap kill me," and all kind of stuff. It's an emotionally driven sport. So, on the build-up, as we progress further, and the girls is the first time we have all the players from abroad who have worked playing, well, not professional, but they're playing under professional
college, yeah.
Right. And it was good to see them coming together and gelling together and playing, and the natural music we have in our bodies as you and soul, as you know, you could see it demonstrated in the field, and so there was an anxiety and expectation because we always want to look like the United States and look like Mexico and look like those other countries.
I know, Canada. And
here it is where we had reached that stage to the point of the final for the qualifier. So that when the response, the demands for seats were as they were, that was no surprise. And it was the first time in so many years that we have been able to do that. Now, of course, there will be expectations from the girls, as well as expectations from us in the association. But a team works with a coach who determines the routine, the schedule for trainings and games and everything. And the coach had to go back to the United States because he's contracted to a club in the United States, a top club at that. And they're in competition now. So to prepare his team for the United States competition. So there was a kind of to and fro as to his replacement, because you have to be very careful when you are putting a replacement that the replacement carries on the vision and the dream.
Seamless transition.
Right. And that was kind of challenging because, number one, what the coach was saying, he should send his son, who was an assistant, to continue training here, along with his trainer. We're talking about the whole American team, and that was not palatable for me because I'm talking about transference of technology and knowledge. And we ought to have locals working closely, in that environment. So there was some to and fro in there. When we eventually decided to appoint a coach, now we have to communicate with the coach from the United States, explain what it is, and we were able to get a coach, Russell, who has some experience in coaching.
Before Russell, you had Spence. Before Russell, you had Spence holding in there.
Yeah, but we had to make a decision, right? And Russell was the decision we took. We can't talk about that. So they are in training. You see, the adrenaline, the spin-off from what obtained at that final, it would linger. Plus the fact that they didn't have the benefit of a psychologist to help them to treat with it.
Yes.
So there are expectations, of course. But unless they are told and they're weaned out of an environment, mental environment, you'll have shocks. And of course, they decide to complain, and which is reasonable. So it is not that there's any disrespect for the ladies. As a matter of fact, one thing we must acknowledge with Mr. Blatter is over the last few years, he has insisted that women should take front stage as men.
Good.
In fact, he did predict that women football will be just as competitive as men. I don't know if you remember that.
But it is. It is, based on the Women's World Cup.
That's
now.
right.
It's Canada.
It is.
The opening game was yesterday.
Because a lot of resources had been injected into women football, and emphasis on almost everything said, women football, women football. It was like a mantra.
Everywhere in the world besides Trinidad.
Well, Trinidad always complain about money, because we have a corporate population here, which do not understand preparation before you reach at the top, and they only want to jump on the bandwagon when you are winning and you are at the top.
Yeah, we say the business all the time. Overnight sensations are the sensations that's been working for years before you actually heard about them, and that is the preparation to which you refer. We've got a small window of time. I've got 2 questions. Let me just move one in. We have articulated, we have echoed a number of the problems and brought clarity on a lot of the situations that prevail and prevailed in the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association. Give me a look forward in your crystal ball. Do you see this situation, particularly the shortfall of money, particularly the non-participation of the corporate entities in assisting football? Do you see anything changing that? Is there anything our listeners listening this morning can do to assist you in the organization in getting that sort of cognizance as to the importance of having good corporate citizens?
Well, what we have done, we have embarked on some income generating initiatives. And I would think that when the corporate Trinidad look in, they are going to see a lot being done to assist football. For us to assist ourselves. But let me back up a bit. When I took office and I recognized what had happened, having done the situational analysis, my immediate response was that we have to rebrand. The first thing I did was go back to TTFA. Unit was TTFF, so I went back to TTFA. The second thing we did was change the logo entirely, so we have a different look. When you look at anything football Trinidad, you see something different picture. And coming out of our conversation at the hierarchy in football, FIFA had decided to introduce in Trinidad what is known as a normalization committee. That committee will consist of FIFA's people coming into Trinidad and telling Trinidad how to run their business, their football business. And I told the director then that I consider it an insult and it's infidel for us to take that road, because we have talented people, we have educated people, we have independent thinking people, all of whom could come together and do what you want. We don't need MA coming here to tell us how to do it. He says, well, you have to convince us what you want to do. And I spoke of an independent reform commission consisting of 7 independent professional people who don't have to be involved in football, but they understand organization, they understand business and marketing and that stuff. So I invited Derek Murray. At the time, it was of course strategic to have him as chairman of Transparency International, After 2 weeks, he pulled out because he had more responsibilities added to what he already had. So he was excused, and we invited Mr. Raul John, who is the managing director of KPMG for the Caribbean. We invited Dinan Ramnarayan, who most people know as he was the president of the West Indies Cricket
Players Association. Yeah.
Brian Lewis, who is the head of the Olympic Committee and a lecturer at the master's level for sports management. Extremely independent as well. Independent Senator Elton Prescott, senior counsel. Dr. Sheila Rampasad, Patrick Raymond. You might know Patrick from the old days.
Yes.
He was a connoisseur, full connoisseur. He's an architect out of in New York now. And Shaka Hislop. I brought in that football flavor.
Are they all on board, are they?
Yeah. And they worked together for a year and a half and came up with a document, having spoken to most stakeholders, inclusive of the British FA and other FA, international FA, looking at the constitution, see what the best practices are, and pull it all together, tailor-make it to suit our country here, and presented a paper which wowed FIFA. So they came here and they looked at it, and we had arguments to and fro, and for conversation and clarification and so on. And we have that document. Now that document seeks to ensure that there's good governance, that there's transparency and accountability in every step of the way. So that is why I could anticipate what the future would be for football, because we are putting the mechanism in place, the infrastructure, to ensure that things don't go off track.
At the end of the day, folks can do knee-jerk reaction, but you are in fact putting in the structures that will see football onto a better day. I thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. It is really